The Joe Rogan Experience.
What we're talking about with anti-Semitism, one of the reasons why it's always been so confusing to me is because it seems to be this, there's a lot of these white supremacists that they lean in that, they lean towards anti-Semitism first. Like almost, it's almost more acceptable. It's almost more like they think they can get away with it. They'll find more support online. If you say online in a lot of these forums, like if you say, "Hey, we got to get rid of all these black people," there's gonna be so many more red flags than if you say we have to get rid of Jews. Like that doesn't. I don't understand that one because it's. When people look different from you, if you are an Asian person who is racist against black people, or a black person who's racist against white people, or if someone's different than you, that at least racism is always disgusting. It's always horrific and ignorant, but at least I can kind of see how you could be tricked into thinking that way. I don't understand anti-Semitism.
Anti-Semitism is not just a normal bigotry.
Right.
It's a conspiracy theory. It's a way of understanding and making sense of the world, especially in times of economic and social upheaval. The reason that anti-Semitism is resurgent right now is because, I'm not justifying it, but it's because we're in, going back to our earlier conversation, a time where people are disoriented, they're disaffected, they're confused, they're shortchanged, and they're looking for an easy answer.
So they're looking for a scapegoat.
Yes.
But there's no lines that point to Jews. This is what's so confusing to me. It's like there's no clear thing. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, you have to wrap your mind around the idea, which is a huge, huge, huge idea, that anti-Semitism is built into the scaffolding of Western civilization. Period. It's never going away. It's like, think about it like an intellectual disease that's built into the foundations of the civilization that we live in. And in times where that civilization or a given society is healthy, anti-Semitism, along with xenophobia and racism and all kinds of other bigotry, are sort of kept in check. And when the society becomes unhealthy, and we're living in a deeply unhealthy society in many different ways right now, anti-Semitism is something that people reach for. Right? It's like, if you want to understand like the Nazi rise to power, you kind of can't understand it without looking to the fact that there was, an incredible economic depression in Germany and there was a scapegoat. And if you look, it's not to justify it, but if you look throughout history, right? Look at the bubonic plague. The bubonic plague came because of rats to the European continent that were brought on ships from Crimea. But people did not at the time, they looked, who did they blame? They blamed the Jews. The Jews were dying at a lesser rate than their non-Jewish neighbors, probably because of religious rituals that Jews have, like washing your hands before you break bread and say a blessing, dunking in the ritual bath before the Sabbath, and all of these other things that probably kept them more protected against the plague than their neighbors. But rather than looking into it and saying, oh, maybe they're doing something right and something we should mimic, their neighbors said, kill the Jews, throw the Jews down the well. And it led to, massive pogroms, killing Jews and the claim was that the Jews literally poisoned the drinking water throughout Europe. So it's this irrational hatred, but it is so, so deep because it goes back to the most important myth that Western civilization is built on, and that is the Christian story.
Jewish people are... It's.
Does that make any sense?
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. But the fact that it still continues doesn't make any sense.
The reason it's very hard to talk about this is because it's so enormous. It's like accepting the fact that it's like you have to accept as a foundational principle that this is baked into the world that we live in. And we're never going to cure it, and it's never going to go completely away. The best thing that we can do is build healthy cultures that protect certain virtues like liberty, like freedom of the individual, like religious liberty, all the it's not a coincidence that America's been so good for the Jews. It's because so many of the ideas that protect minorities and religious minorities, like Jews, were sort of for all of their fault, for all of the founders' faults, right? And they had many, including owning people. But, George Washington, he writes this letter to the first Jewish community of this country in Rhode Island. And he says something that was then incredibly radical, which is pathetic that it was. But he says, Jews in America are not just going to be tolerated. They're going to possess the same citizenship as everyone else. That at the time was a radical departure from history. In the Islamic world, the Jews had always lived as dhimmis, as second-class citizens. And in the Christian world, it was worse. I mean, what people forget, right, is like right now radical Islam, when it comes to the religions, is the greatest threat to Jews. But for most of its history, Islam was much more tolerant of Jews than Christianity was, which is something that's kind of like has gotten lost to history.